Hello, Gabriel. How are you?
It was funny because we're standing in the kitchen.
Oh, thank you.
Morning to each of you. If we could start coming in and grabbing our seats. Get started. While you're doing that, I do want to remind you that we do still have some books left to sell. We really need to sell about 10 to 15 more of these. So if you haven't gotten yours yet, that's $15 you'll spend this week. We are so appreciative of this book. Thanks so highly of it. We'll let you pay $20 for the book. But we only ask 15. At this time, Eric Mayborn, one of our Bible majors, will come up and introduce our speaker, and then we'll turn it over to our speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. Our speaker for the 9 o'clock lecture this morning will be David Deffenbaugh. David has preached full-time for the past 40 years. He currently serves as an associate minister for the Centerville congregation here in Crowley, Arkansas. He's previously preached for congregations in Oklahoma City, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Oklahoma, Harrison, Arkansas, and Joplin, Missouri. He's done extensive short-term mission work in Ukraine, has authored 3 daily Bible reading and devotional books, and served as an adjunct Bible professor at CRC. And let me tell you, I am taking general letters right now, and he's definitely getting hard work cut out for me. I will just say that. He and his wife Tanya have been married 42 years and have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. David, if you will come up, and we'll say a prayer over you. Please bow. Our Father in heaven, I would just like to say overall, thank you for this week and thank you for this lectureship. Thank you for all the speakers that have brought their messages to us. Thank you for the knowledge and insight we are getting into the prophet Hosea. And Lord, as David presents his lecture this morning, I just pray a blessing over him. Please guide him in his words and please work through him to bring us a good message. And Lord, I just pray that our hearts are attentive to his words, and I pray that we can learn something from him. Thank you so much for your son, Jesus Christ, and thank you for the life that we live in him. And it's in his name I pray this prayer.
It's always, I say always, I don't know if it's ever happened before, but it is a little unnerving when a current student has the opportunity to stand before a crowd of people and introduce you. So I'm pretty pleased with how that went there. Thank you very much. I do want to express my gratitude and appreciation to CRC and to the Lectureship Committee and those responsible for giving me this opportunity to be here. I'm not a graduate of CRC, but I have come to love and appreciate this place. You know how it is when somebody that you love loves somebody, then that just naturally transfers. And I have the privilege and opportunity of working side by side with Michael Meredith and Kiefer Ramsey, and I hear very regularly what CRC means to them. And because they love it so much, therefore I love it so much. And so it is very, very good to be with you this morning. I recall very well being in utter disbelief at what my father was telling me. And I just flat did not believe him. And maybe that's one of the reasons why this was such, and it is such an ingrained memory, is because I've always considered my dad to be very trustworthy. Very trustworthy. And I've not changed that opinion down through the years. You know, that played out in a lot of ways. It played out in my faith, and eventually came to the point of having to go through that very challenging but necessary process of understanding and deciding that what I believe not because Dad told me, but because I believe that's what that God is actually teaching. And I'll just tell you that I've not landed exactly the same place Dad landed on many things through the years. But generally speaking, what he said, I believe. I remember another occasion in which he came to my bedroom one morning, and which itself was a little bit of an unusual thing, but I was actually expecting him because the night before I had violated curfew. And all he said to me was, "Son, that does not need to happen again." Enough said. Trustworthy. But on this occasion, I just was not believing it. And I can just tell you what he said to me, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll know exactly the circumstances. In light of what was just getting ready to happen, he said, "David, this is going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you." Utter and complete disbelief on my part. Now, I do understand now. But I did not then. Now, what transpired immediately after he told me was actually the end of a process that had been ongoing for a very long time in our family. And I think you can relate to this, or at least you know a little bit about it. A child is born into what ideally is a very loving and nurturing relationship. And in that context, then, there is guidance and instruction that's given. It is communicated what expectations are. But then when that is deviated from, there are warnings. And if those warnings are not heeded, there might come a time in which it is necessary for there to be extreme measures taken for correction. That's what I was experiencing that day. That's exactly what's taking place in the history of God's relationship with his people. He brought them forth into a loving relationship, a very nurturing relationship. He provided guidance and instruction and counsel as to what he expected from them, what he wanted from them. The expectations were communicated clearly. But sometimes those were deviated from. And sometimes to the degree that God found it necessary, just in the prophets, like Hosea. And to warn very sternly of the consequences if they continued on the path that they were on. So I was very fortunate to be reared in a family that somewhat at least mirrored that. I know a lot of people were not so privileged or blessed. And so here comes Hosea. And God he's really wanting to get his child, his people's attention. And so he asks Hosea to do something in the extreme. Go marry this woman, a prostitute. And then she leaves him, after having done that and bearing children, she leaves it, go get her back. That's pretty extreme. But then other than that, Hosea goes into this process of painting all of these pictures to try to help these people understand. These are word pictures. And they're very powerful. They communicate strongly. And they're all over the book of Hosea. You find Hosea likening these people to an unfaithful wife, a person who is taken ill, a trained calf, wild grapes and figs, a woman in childbirth, a whore, a prostitute, a silly dove, an unattended fire in a baker's oven, an early morning mist or dew, hence the title of this whole lectureship, like a morning cloud. Chaff on the threshing floor, smoke billowing out of a window. All of these pictures are there, and then also there's the one with which we are going to concern ourselves this morning. A cake unturned. That's found in Hebrews chapter 7 and in verse 8. Ephraim is a cake not turned. I have not heard this yet in this series. That I have not heard every lecture either. So forgive me if this is repetition for you, but you know the Bible kind of repeats itself a few times, so I don't feel too bad about this. Ephraim is a cake not turned. We know that that is not a reference to the man Ephraim, and it is not a reference specifically to the tribe of Ephraim, but rather it's a name for the nation. And this is not just merely coincidental. It is not just merely a matter of Hosea and God through Hosea picking up on language that was commonly used and just borrowing it to use it. There is purpose and intent behind it. You know, God cares about names, doesn't he? So much so that at times he does the naming, and sometimes he changes the names. Names have meaning and importance, and this is no exception. 37 times in the book of Hosea, the nation is referred to as Ephraim. He is identifying these people in a very particular way. There's some ideas and thoughts that come to mind when you think of Ephraim. Of course, that goes back to a man. It goes back to one of the sons of Joseph. Now, we know that Ephraim is one of the tribes. It was one of the 10 northern tribes that rebelled and divided. It was the largest tribe. But what we might not remember readily is the fact that Ephraim was not a son of Jacob. The 12 tribes are representative of the 12 sons of Jacob. Well, Ephraim was not a son of Jacob. He was a grandson of Jacob. He was a son of Joseph. He was a son of Joseph. He was the second-born son of Joseph. The first-born son of Joseph was Manasseh. You recognize that name too. But there's something very interesting that happens with these two boys. Their mother is an Egyptian. These boys are only half Jewish. Their mother was an Egyptian woman by the name of Asenath. And that incredible story at the end of the book of Genesis where the family of Jacob is reunited. They're transported from the land of promise. Jacob's finally convinced, yes, God wants him to come down into Egypt. And Joseph is there, that reunion with this boy that he has been thought to be dead for so many years. and Joseph has two boys, and he brings those boys to his father. And you can understand that. You can understand the joy of being able to present your father's grandsons to him for the first time. But something very interesting happens on that occasion. It's Genesis chapter 48. As Joseph brings his boys to father, it is Jacob who says that he wants to bless them. I had always kind of operated under the assumption that Joseph wanted his father to bless them, but it's Jacob who initiates this idea of blessing these boys. And what he says in regard to these boys is interesting. Or what he does in regard to these boys is interesting. He brings them, they're going to be blessed by Jacob. And so Joseph puts Ephraim on his right and Manasseh on his left. So the father who is facing them would then naturally put his right hand on Manasseh, the oldest, his left hand on the youngest, Ephraim, and give this blessing that he is going to bless, or give, the eldest getting the greater blessing. That's how it's supposed to work. But to Joseph's amazement, he watches as his father crosses his hands. And he puts his right hand on Ephraim's head, his left on Manasseh's, and Joseph tries to correct him, and Jake says, no. No. He gave the greater blessing, the blessing of the eldest, to Ephraim. How ironic is this? God loves irony. He absolutely loves irony. That it is Jacob, the supplanter, the one through the manipulations of his mother and himself, work it out so he became the recipient. The younger son became the recipient of the blessing instead of the elder. And he's doing the same thing purposefully and deliberately with these two grandsons. Ephraim is suddenly in a place that he really wasn't supposed to be. Because Jacob had been in a place that he really wasn't supposed to be. But then I want you to notice this with me as well. This actually comes from 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 5, when in the book of Chronicles, the lineage of all these 12 sons is being given. And the eldest of those sons of Jacob is Reuben. Listen to this. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's couch, his birthright, listen to this, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he could not be enrolled as the oldest son. Though Judah became strong among his brothers, and a chief came from him, yet the birthright belonged to Joseph. And which son of Joseph received that? It was Ephraim. You see, the point of all this, because Ephraim as a tribe is going to go on to become very prominent, its largest. There are some very significant individuals who come from Ephraim. Joshua, Ehud, Deborah, when Gideon gathered up his famous army, he recruited from Ephraim. You have locations like Shiloh and Bethel and Shechem, all playing prominent roles in the history. They're all in. Ephraim is important. It is very important. Ephraim has been placed in a position and a place that it didn't deserve to be, that really it should not have been, and yet there it is. And so when Hosea calls the people to whom he is prophesying Ephraim, that's a loaded term. It's carrying a lot of baggage and a lot of weight. That you are a people whom God blessed when you didn't deserve to be blessed. You're a people whom God has placed in a position that you didn't deserve to be in. You've been given every blessing and opportunity by the Lord, and yet here we are. Ephraim, you're a cake not turned. That reminds me a little bit of a proverb, a Russian proverb. I heard some Ukrainian ladies use one time when we were in campaign there, and I don't remember what was going on. And they said something, and the translator translated and said, well, you always ruin the first pancake. It's not the same point, but it's a very similar point. Taking a picture, an idea from a very common, well-known, everyday occurrence of life, so that everybody can relate to it, just very much like Jesus did when he taught in parables. He took very common, everyday occurrences of life to use them as a vehicle to teach. And this is one of those, a cake not turned. The picture that would have come to the mind of these people was the same picture that we read about in 1 Kings chapter 19, when the prophet Elijah is running from the threats of Jezebel. You remember. So threatened does Elijah feel that he determines that he would be better off dead than alive. And the Lord appears, comes to him, and he tells him, I want you to... I read this last week, somebody posted, when Elijah was in such depths of despair, the Lord appeared to him and told him two things. You need a nap and you need a snack. Never underestimate the spiritual power of a nap and a snack. And he told Elijah, I've got something for you to do. And you're going to begin this journey on the power of this meal. And this meal is described for us in verse 6 of 1 Kings 19, a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And so that's how things were done. Oftentimes. Place stones, hopefully with a flat surface, in fires to heat those stones up, and then the stone is removed and prepared batter is placed on that stone, and it cooks the batter on the stone to make the cake. But in this case, the cook messed up. The cook messed up. Everything was going fine until it was time to turn the cake over. You know, you got to turn those pancakes over. It just doesn't work if you don't. They're ruined. And that's the picture. And that picture is very expressive for us. It tells us several things. I think there are several truths that can be drawn from it. The first of those I want you to note with me is the fact that attention to detail does not guarantee success. Attention to detail does not guarantee success. The problem in this cooking effort was not because they messed up the recipe for the batter for the cake. That's not what happened here. The batter was prepared perfectly. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. The problem was not a failure to attend to the details that were present. In 1991, Oliver Stone released a movie simply titled JFK. In that movie, he was depicting what has long been considered a conspiracy theory about the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, I don't know if the recent released documents have verified or denied what Oliver Stone was trying to tell us or not, but the point is that that movie was hailed as a cinematic, I don't know if you call it masterpiece or not, but it was a great piece of work on the basis of the fact of how well and how accurately he depicted Dallas in 1963. He had to recreate the scene down to the smallest details, and apparently he did a fantastic job. But here's the rub. The thought was, well, he was so accurate with the details, then the story must be true that he's telling. That does not necessarily follow. But in the minds of many people, that does follow. And you know what? We see that sometimes, I'm afraid. that we can get caught up in details, in correctness. Now, I'm all about correctness, and I'm all about be right, and all of those kinds of things. But if we put all of our eggs in that basket of being right and being correct, that therefore that means spiritual success. It's been referred to as justification by correctness. No. Getting the details right does not guarantee success. Getting the batter recipe correct does not guarantee the success of what's produced. You're a cake unturned. A second reality, spiritual truth, is a cake not turned speaks to inattentiveness, if not neglect. My wife's a pretty good cook. I've always thought so. And I've watched her as she was getting ready to prepare a dish that she will begin heating up a skillet. And she will wait until she can get a drop of water and drop it on that skillet, and then it'll just kind of sizzle and skitter around the surface. It's now hot enough then to begin the process. If you don't pay attention to that detail, you're going to ruin the dish. If you are not attentive to the cake that is cooking and turn it over at the appropriate time, you're going to ruin it. Inattention is a serious problem. It reminds me in the book of Hebrews of what we read about there. About this group of Christians who have become lax, dull of hearing, lacking steadfastness, wavering, weak, drifting, neglectful. And it's not that they were in that condition because they didn't have a chance to start off with. They had great teachers and leaders to begin with. And they had started very well. As a matter of fact, they had demonstrated great levels of commitment and dedication to the Lord. And yet now, they were in trouble. And it was because of their inattentiveness. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 1, therefore we must pay much closer attention to what we've heard, lest we drift away from that. You've got to pay close attention. And Hosea's Ephraim had been given every advantage and opportunity that you can imagine in a place to bring great glory to God, and yet their inattention left them as a cake not turned. And so we have those many pleas to diligence in the New Testament. Ephesians 4 and verse 3. Be diligent to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. 2 Timothy 2:15. Be diligent to present yourself to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed. 2 Peter 1 and verse 10. Therefore, brothers, be all the more diligent to confirm your calling and election. We are called to diligence, to attentiveness and attention given to what we're doing in our walk with God. A cake not turned speaks to inattention, if not neglect. Thirdly, a cake not turned speaks to ruin and worthlessness. Cake batter that is left uncooked is worthless. That same cake batter, too long exposed to heat, moves beyond usefulness and is burned. And in this picture, both conditions are present at the same time. It's raw and it's burned. It has become totally worthless. A clever cook is able to take, even without a recipe, just different things, even leftovers out of the refrigerator, and add some new ingredients and whatever, and make a great dish. I don't know if you know this about Michael, but he's somewhat of a foodie. And it's not unusual for him to tell us in the office in the morning what he did for supper. Oh, I took some of this, and I took a little bit of that, and I took this over here, and he put that, he said it was wonderful. Now, I'm not sure if he's as good a cook as he thinks he is. I did some of this stuff, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But a clever cook can do that kind of thing. But this is something that is worthless. It's unusable. It's kind of like the recommendation I've heard for cooking kale. You know, you put oil or grease or something in the skillet, and then you put the kale in there and you cook it till it's done. And then since you put the oil in there, it slides off a lot easier out of the skillet into the trash can. But this is truly worthless. God has a long track record of reclaiming that which is ruined and spoiled. That message is delivered very clearly in the opening chapter of the New Testament. You know that boring genealogy of Jesus? That genealogy, not as impactful to a modern mind as it was to a first century mind. There are 4 women mentioned in this genealogy. That's shocking. But beyond that, each of these 4 women have reputations for one reason or another that are less than ideal. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and the 4th that he's not even named by name, but only referred to as the wife of Uriah. God is able to reclaim and redeem and restore. And yet, Scripture also depicts for us the possibility of becoming worthless to God. And there's nothing any more tragic than that which has been prepared and put in place and advantaged by God than becoming useless to God. You know, Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 2 that we are his workmanship. That is, we are that upon which God has gone to work. He has exerted effort on us. We are his workmanship. But with that in mind, then you come over to Hebrews chapter 6 and beginning in verse 7. He's talking about land. Land that has drunk the rain that has fallen on it and produces a crop useful to those whose forsake it is cultivated, receives a blessing from God. We're in farm country. We're used to seeing crops growing. A lot of work and effort goes into making those crops. And when land responds the way that it's supposed to respond, the way that God designed it to respond, it's a blessing. But he goes on. But if after all that work it bears thorns and thistles, it's worthless and near to being cursed, and its end is to be burned. So whether you're talking about a burned field or burned cake, cake not turned speaks to ruin and worthlessness. A cake not turned, fourthly, speaks to what has become unpalatable. Another childhood memory that I have, and I'm sure many of you share the same kind of experiences going through the cafeteria line at school. And your responsibility as a student, young student, I don't know, I was kindergarten, probably first grade, going through that line, you get to pick out the milk out of the little freezer there behind you. And oh man, the glorious day when one of the options was chocolate milk. That was marvelous. But most days it was just, regular old white milk, a little pint carton. And so you grab that carton and you go through the line and you're given your tray and you go sit down and you open that milk and you take a glug. And it's gone bad. And you can't get that out of your mouth fast enough. Which we know is the very picture that is used in Scripture of the lukewarm Christian. God said, I'm going to spit you out like bad milk. Or the other picture that we find on at least a couple of occasions in which what is eaten is bitter, it is sweet to the mouth, it becomes bitter in the stomach. The unpalatableness of food is a very graphic picture that we can all relate to. And that's what we have here, is that which has become unpalatable to God. A cake not turned. The picture that Hosea paints for us is a very graphic picture. It's one that we can relate to. But the question is, why have they become that? How have they become that? And it's in our text, that verse, that explains it to us as it begins. Ephraim mixes himself with the peoples. Ephraim is a cake not turned. Ephraim did not have the right, the proper relationship to the people that it should have had. Now, that is true in a very literal way for the literal tribe of Ephraim, because when the lands were divided up under the leadership of Joshua, it is said about the tribe of Ephraim in Joshua 16 and verse 10, however, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day. Literally, the tribe of Ephraim failed to do with the people what God instructed them to do. Now, I want you to hear this description that's given in Psalm 106 of this very circumstance, beginning in verse 34. They did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them, but they mixed with the nations and learned to do as they did. There's the problem. We are called upon to be a called out people. We're familiar with the biblical phrase, and I get, come out from among them and be ye separate. But at the same time, we know that we're called upon to be in the world. That we would be light in the darkness. That we would be salt that doesn't stay in the salt shaker, but is spread to have its influence. Just as Jesus prayed for his own apostles in John 17, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that by your Spirit you keep them. And so we have this challenge of being in the world, as we sometimes say, in the world, but not of the world. That we live in this world, but we have the right relationship with the world around us, something that Ephraim failed to do. Now, we see mistakes made here in that regard. We have seen mistakes made in which some bodies of believers go to the point of completely isolating themselves from the world around them. That's not what God had intended. And you see others who become so engaged with the world that there is no distinction whatsoever made between the behavior of the world and their own behavior. That's not what God had intended. I think taking our cue from Jesus, always a good idea. But in this regard, it's a very good idea as well. Because Jesus came into this world. He came as light into the darkness. And we know that the darkness's response to that, it rejected it. But Jesus came into this world. And so we see Jesus very often in association with people who, as they are called, are sinners. They're sinners. They're people who have in their lives so chosen to live in rebellion against God. And yet there's Jesus, and he is among them. So much so that his enemies come to refer to him as a friend of sinners. And that was not a compliment. So Jesus did that. But Jesus also spent time with the brethren. And we all know that sometimes spending time with the brethren can be as challenging as anything else we do. But he spent time with the crowds who were coming after him to hear him, and he ministered to them, and he taught them. He spent time with the 12, a selected group that he engaged with daily. And even from among those 12, there were 3, sometimes 4. With him, he had this very, very close and special relationship. And then there were all of those times that Jesus was by himself, alone, in the wilderness, the Eremos. Jesus spent a lot of time in the Eremos. And we know what he did there. He prayed. He communed with the Father. And it was the reality of all of these things together that allowed Jesus to have the right relationship, as we are called to have with the world around us. And this is what consecration is all about. It's making the decision and putting forth the intentional effort so that the normative influence, that is, the influence that is actually changing and shaping me, is the influence of God, not the world. That I can go into the world and I can interact with the world, but I am consecrated to God all the while. Ephraim's failure. They mixed with the peoples and did as they did. They're a cake, not turned. And so it is that we are challenged with hearing Hosea's warning and responding appropriately to it, which Ephraim, Israel, failed to do. But we can. But in order to do that, that consecration has to be in place. And we have to take very decided measures to make sure that it is in place. Because we are absolutely inundated with other influences. We carry one of the most powerful influences ever known to humanity around with us all the time. This itself becomes a demonstration of the relationship where we will either fail or succeed. That for hours on end, every day, whether it's this, or television, or radio, conversation, whatever it is, how are we going to ensure that normative influence, that influence that actually shapes me, doesn't come from there, but it comes from God? And it is taking the time, making the time, carving out the time that you are going to spend with him alone. It is finding those people of like mind and like spirit, 2 or 3, who are doing exactly the same thing you are doing and spending time with them. It is being a part of a community, a church family, a congregation, we'd call it, of people who to varying degrees have that same interest or that same concern. It is all of these things that will allow us to be consecrated to God. And then, therefore, to be in this world, salt and light. And not a cake, not turned. Thank you.
education is under attack all across our nation. And many of our Christian institutions are struggling to stay open. I'm thankful that we have a president here that has accepted the challenge to push this place to continue to stay open and offer Christian education. To our guests, I hope that you understand the value of Christian education. To those of you who support us here at CRC, we're very, very appreciative and hope that you'll continue to do so. But one of the biggest contributions that you can make to Christian education is to encourage kids to choose Christian education. I was given a statistic just yesterday that 75% of our church kids that go to a secular institution or university end up leaving the church, leaving Christianity. And those that hang on to it tend to migrate towards progressive Christianity instead of a wholesome Christianity. And so I hope it's not the case that CRC is taking our students and when you graduate, sending you out unturned. And if that's the case, may God forgive us. But I hope it's the case, to use David's terminology, that here at CRC we're satisfying our mission and permeating you, the students, with goodness and the righteousness of God, and helping you to chart a course in your life that will draw you nearer to both the heart and the holiness of God. So thankful that y'all are here. Thankful that y'all were able to hear that wonderful message from David. At this time, we will pause and take just a few minutes of intermission before we go to our classes. Men's class will be out here in the Student Center. The ladies' class will be here. Dr. Vanessa will be in here with you ladies, and then Katie Krimmel, one of our graduates, will be out here in the Student Center. Westbrook, there it is, sorry. I got blank for just a minute. But you are dismissed for the next about 10 or 11 minutes, and we'll go to our class.